Hey all, no Null here. As you may have been able to tell, I'm sort of a big fan of Mr. Puzzles. So I was glad when he was brought back after the Puzzlevision movie, and when we got a mini arc centered around him with the Meme Factory episodes, even if admittedly the endings for both the Puzzlevision saga and Meme Factory mini arc were pretty underwhelming due to some questionable writing. Following Mr. Puzzle's defeat in the Meme Factory mini arc, we know that he'll be back for some revenge, likely in time for WOTFI 2024. Since that will probably be the next big event in the SMG4 series, and so far this has pretty much been the year of Mr. Puzzles. This video isn't so much a theory video more than it is a wish list of ideas I'd like to see the SMG4 team do with Mr. Puzzles' character in future episodes or arcs. This first segment of the video revolves around my theory that Mr. Puzzles will be the antagonist for WOTFI 2024. I'm basically going to lay out a general overview of how I'd write a WOTFI 2024 arc under the premise that Mr. Puzzles is the antagonist and is seeking revenge in his next plot, revenge serving as his primary motivation, with his other desires, such as taking over SMG4's show, or gaining SMG4's popularity, taking less priority this time round. Going with the revenge theme, what if Mr. Puzzles gathers a bunch of previously defeated SMG4 villains who also seek to get revenge on the SMG4 cast? The idea of an arc where multiple past villains team up has been around for a long time, so it'd be cool to see this idea finally envisioned. And if there was any villain who would serve as a good leader for such a group, Mr. Puzzles certainly fits the bill, especially as he is a master manipulator as demonstrated in 2023. The obvious candidates for who would join Mr. Puzzles firstly includes Marty, last year's WOTFI antagonist, and secondly includes Lawyer Khan, who I don't think anyone would care about suddenly becoming a villain again, as well as including a bunch of more minor villains classic and modern like Star, Mr. Nice Guy, the remnants of the Box Club, Wheeler, Depresso, X, Whisk from Sunset Paradise, and I guess we can include that Mexican master hand as well, Mayo. Perhaps Mr. Puzzles could even recruit a reluctant SMG3, who could actually be secretly working against Mr. Puzzles in an admittedly not so surprising twist, but having SMG3, as well as Marty, on Mr. Puzzles' side would justify the last episode of this arc being called War of the Fat Italians. The premise for the plot of this WOTFI 2024 arc would be pretty simple. Mr. Puzzles manipulates all of these past villains to join him in a bid to finally get revenge on the SMG4 cast. Perhaps in the lead up to the WOTFI arc, we can have individual episodes where each of these villains return. I'm not really that creative, so I don't know what would happen next, though since the ratings briefly returned in the Meme Factory mini arc, perhaps they could return in this WOTFI arc as well, and maybe we can finally get a proper explanation of why having the highest ratings in the SMG4 universe can grant someone full creative control over the entire universe. The WOTFI itself could once again be held in the format of 1v1 challenges, since we had a different format last year, and once again this would be a team WOTFI, with the SMG4 cast pitted against Mr. Puzzles' evil cast. And unlike in WOTFI 2022 where the main antagonist didn't participate in the challenges, this time Mr. Puzzles as well as Lawyer Khan would also be competing in the challenges. And then finally, of course, we would have the rap battle at the end, Mr. Puzzles featuring heavily in it. This idea of mine could use some further development, as it has some issues, such as the WOTFI idea not differentiating itself from the past arc WOTFIs like 2021 and 2022, unlike how WOTFI 2023 differentiated itself from the recent trend to avoid being stale. There's also the issue of this WOTFI perhaps being reminiscent of the YouTube arc and SMG3's anti-cast. The last thing I want to mention on this WOTFI point is that I think this next arc would have to develop on the bond that Mr. Puzzles and Meggy/Leggy developed in the mini arc. Meggy may have a soft spot for Mr. Puzzles now, so perhaps she could be instrumental in reasoning with him if his next plan goes way overboard in some way, or perhaps she could even play a role in redeeming him. However, I do not think that this WOTFI arc should end in a Mr. Puzzles redemption, since I've mentioned before that this would come across as a rehash of SMG3's character arc, and I personally think Mr. Puzzles is better suited as a kind of replacement for classic SMG3, serving as the main antagonist of the show who pops up every so often, whether that be in regular standalone episodes with low stakes evil plans, or in more serious high stakes arcs and mini arcs. Moving on, my second idea for what they could do with Mr. Puzzles going forward is to give Mr. Puzzles a secret base. Specifically, what I'd like to see is a new building built in the showgrounds by Mr. Puzzles. I liked how Mr. Puzzles was just spying on SMG4 in the bushes of the showgrounds in the Meme Factory mini arc. So I came up with the idea that Mr. Puzzles could build a secret base hidden away on the showgrounds in order to spy on the SMG4 cast and plot his next evil plans. It'd also just be cool to see where Mr. Puzzles lives and what sort of home he would live in. I'm thinking that this base could be built somewhere directly behind the castle and hidden near the trees at the back and behind some bushes or whatever. This base could take the shape of a TV station, film studio or cinema, for obvious reasons. Personally, I feel like a TV station would be the most fitting design, which could have a massive tower on the top, like in this reference image. That would not make the secret base very well concealed at all, which I think is pretty fitting considering the goofy nature of Mr. Puzzles. Perhaps we could design the entrance to look like a classic cinema entrance and have studio sets and equipment inside of the building, allowing us to incorporate those two other themes for the building I suggested. The entrance of the building would necessarily have to include the puzzlevision logo, and perhaps underneath we can have the same puzzlevision font seen on Mr. Puzzles' TV head. I suppose that would give this secret base the dual purpose of being the headquarters of puzzlevision. Alright, so my last suggestion for what they could do with Mr. Puzzles' character next isn't exactly an original idea of mine, but I'd like to discuss how they could actually implement it into the series. And that idea is the introduction of a new character, Mrs. Puzzles. Whenever a character with the title Mr. is introduced, it's pretty natural to think about the idea of a female counterpart to the character. But how may that play out in Mr. Puzzles' case? Well, as I see it, there are two ways they could make a Mr. and Mrs. Puzzles dynamic play out. The first is to make them a romantic couple who work together in their villainy, Bonnie and Clyde style, or the second is to make them rivals who compete against each other to take over SMG4's show and the world, as well as to achieve great fame. Though there would still be a romantic element to their relationship. Personally, I prefer the former scenario, as I feel like SMG4 could perfectly fulfill the role of a rival to Mr. Puzzles in entertainment, though the idea of Mr. Puzzles having a more antagonistic character as a rival to is not a bad idea and I wouldn't be against it. But as I said, having a couple serve as antagonists would be a very interesting concept for SMG4, and so this is the idea I would go for if I were to write a Mrs. Puzzles character. Doing this would also allow us to see another romantic subplot in SMG4, since Axel and Melanie, which would be interesting to see, especially as the Axel and Melanie romantic subplot wasn't the deepest thing in the world, and the interesting spin of the romance being between two antagonists would certainly be cool to see play out. To differentiate it further from the Axel and Melanie relationship, perhaps we could have Mrs. Puzzles be the character who initially falls in love, rather than Mr. Puzzles, the male character. Maybe Mrs. Puzzles starts off as a fangirl of Mr. Puzzles or something, explaining why she adopts the name of Mrs. Puzzles despite not being married to him. This decision also makes more sense considering that Mr. Puzzles seems rather uninterested in developing relationships with other characters and is entirely dedicated to his goal of creating the best show ever, though his recent character development with Leggy, where he developed his first friend, could be the bridge towards him developing another, deeper bond with someone else. So their relationship could start off very one-sided, with Mr. Puzzles being reluctant to be around her, but for some plot reason he needs to work with her, but slowly he could develop feelings for her as well. Mr. Puzzles developing a true friend and partner would be a pretty satisfying and fitting outcome for his character, considering how his motivations all originated from his loneliness and inability to make friends as a child. On a final note, I've discussed this Mrs. Puzzles for a little while now, but what would her design actually look like? Would she be designed similarly to Mr. Puzzles, CRT TV head and all, or would she be a radio head or a flat screen head? By the way, maybe we can explain why she also cut off her face and replaced it as simply being due to her deep infatuation with Puzzles, leading her to wanting to be more like him or something like that. There's also the question of what would her primary colors be. Would it be grayscale like Mr. Puzzles, or would she have more color to her? I don't really have a preference on either of these design choices, though her outfit should probably retain the same showmaster theme as Mr. Puzzles, though obviously with a more feminine design. Tell me if you guys have any thoughts about a Mrs. Puzzles character, or any of my other ideas, in the comments below. Whatever happens next with Mr. Puzzles' character, I just hope the conclusion to it will finally be satisfying, and not feel underwhelming this time around. Please SMG4, third time's the charm. Also, please release new Mr. Puzzles merch next time. A Mr. Puzzles Unlimiteds shirt and poster would be very appreciated. It'd be easy money. Anyways, bye.